Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny post-game show following a very interesting game against the Nashville Predators. I can tell you this. One of the things that's interesting about the long layoff the Jets have had, and now, they've got a lot of games to make up. I've looked at the way the teams they're chasing in the Western Conference who are in playoff spots, how they've played. And, there's been some mixed reviews. Anaheim at one point was second place in the Pacific and looked like they really were, pushing to the top of that division. They've kind of fallen by the wayside now. San Jose didn't look like a very dangerous team for me for a while. Now they seem to be making a little bit of a push. And I take a look at this, the Jets now with that loss, maybe points percentage is the best way to kind of gauge where they are with this. Points percentage, they're behind LA now, and they are just ahead of San Jose, which means, only getting 1 point out of their last, possible 4 points means they're squandering those opportunities to kind of fight their way to get back into this. Never mind the fact that you're trying to compete for playoff spots with teams like Calgary, Dallas, who finally won tonight. Is there a more confounding team in the NHL than the Dallas Stars, who look like world beaters at times and then kind of fall off the map and struggle against, lose to the Montreal Canadiens, almost lose tonight against the Buffalo Sabres and pull this out. I guess the one thing that I'm saying out of this is it's starting to look more and more to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've been kind of waiting for the Jets to kind of snap out of it and wake up and start making that push and kind of elbow their way ahead of a lot of these other teams. And maybe that's going to happen. I just think that with all these rescheduled games, with the Jets having to play so many games, probably 46 games now in their next 49 days, the grind of a schedule could make it tough to kind of do that. And I'm just thinking that maybe this is the year. Maybe this is what we can expect from this year, that the Winnipeg Jets are going to be in a dogfight for the rest of the season with all these teams. Never mind if somehow the Edmonton Oilers could ever wake up. Didn't happen tonight. Absolutely got pasted by the Florida Panthers, which, let's be honest, that's kind of what the Florida Panthers have been doing to everybody. But I take a look at how close everyone is here. Maybe you can even throw Vancouver into the mix here. I know they've played 3 more games than the Jets and trail them by 1 point, but the way they've been playing could get things interesting here. But we should break down today's game. We'll get into that, and we'll get into it with one of the best in the business, the guy who definitely has the best entry music in the business. Here comes Kenny Wiebe. Kenny, my guy, great to see you as always. Very interesting game. I'm going to say this once again. I said it earlier on our long-form show earlier today that we had with Tara Sloan, which if anyone is looking to fill some time, that is a great way to do it. Another great interview on our weekly long-form podcast. But I'd said this about the Nashville Predators. This is a team that I gave up faith in a number of years ago. I remember CJ Chris Johnston, a former colleague of ours here who's now with TSN. There was a number of years there where he was calling them to go win the whole thing. He did that the year after the Jets knocked them out of the playoffs. I remember CJ, that was his pick to go all the way, and he was still high on them the following year after that. I thought that the Jets broke that team, and I didn't think they were coming back. A lot of their additions, Ryan Johansson's game, that had been powerful, back in around the 2016-17 era, had really seemed to have fallen off. But this team seems to have reestablished a new identity that is going to make them a tough team to play down the stretch, no matter who they are playing against.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, right? I mean, Nashville, you and I looked at each other after Nashville rolled into town and thought, man, that's not a playoff team. And since that time, all they've done is look like a playoff team. And it's so interesting. I mean, you touched on it at the very beginning. I mean, it's hard to believe that this Predators team was 1-3-1 in their last 5 games, right? They didn't look like a 1-3-1 team, but at the same time, Sean, I mean, the Jets had ample opportunity to get back into that game if their power play had been able to convert. Yes, Pierre-Luc Dubois gets the goal on the bank shot special, and the Jets needed that on their 5-on-3, but their 5-on-4, I mean, yes, they did generate some looks, but they need to convert those. That's how you win games like this. If you put a team on the ropes, if you play an undisciplined team, the only way to make them pay is to score on those 5-on-4s and kind of get back into the game where, I mean, at certain times the Jets looked great, and at other times the Jets were very slow. Like Nashville took it to the Jets, but they did show some pushback. But it's such an interesting game to me because it's sort of like the tale of two different games. I thought that UC Saros played like a Vezina Trophy candidate. So to me, that was the difference in the game. We know that Dave Lowry came to the staunch defense of Connor Hellebuyck, and you expect that. But to me, I think that third goal that Hellebuyck gave up was a bit of a deflator. I mean, I don't blame him on the first one. And Sean, I think we're in agreement. In a lot of ways, that first goal looked like it would be disallowed. I mean, I guess you could say it wasn't conclusive because of how close it was, but I would challenge that all day long. And I think that Dave Lowry and their coaching staff did the right thing by challenging, and that wasn't a deflator for them because they killed the penalty with relative ease. So, but after that, I mean, the one that banks off Pionk, I know some people are upset, but I mean, what's he supposed to do about that? It went off his leg and went in. I mean, there's nothing you can do. Third one's a tip in. Fourth one, the third one is Johansson through the wickets, and that's a goal that has to be stopped. But here's the other part, Sean, and it's not running into the Jets' issues now, but tonight was game 30 for Connor Hellebuyck out of 36. Yes, UC Saros has played more, but he's played more because Nashville's rolling at 41 games played. Connor Hellebuyck is going to need some rest and relief at some point. Are they going to be able to give him some rest on the weekend? I mean, I don't know, Sean. I mean, are you comfortable putting Eric Comrie back in after his layoff and coming out of COVID with basically one practice before that? Yeah. Or do you have to play Mikhail Burden? I mean, there's no easy answer here. I think you have 2 afternoon games, but there's only a 22-hour difference, right? It's an afternoon, a 2 o'clock game followed by a noon game. So even though the travel is light, I mean, and Hellebuyck loves afternoon games, but now all of a sudden you're looking at 32 starts, and now you're giving Eric Comrie the net against the Florida Panthers. I mean, I don't see an easy answer here for the Winnipeg Jets at a time where, as you just talked about out of the gate, every point is valuable, right? So even tonight, so LA is losing tonight. So yes, right now the Jets are below in points percentage, but if LA loses, the Jets kind of sneak back up in there. But I mean, man, it's an interesting time for the Jets on a lot of levels. I was curious if it had gotten to 5-1 instead of 4-2, if Mikhail Burden would have come off the bench for the Jets. But in that situation, the Jets are playing to try to tie the game up, right? So it's super interesting. I'm fascinated to see how the goalie scenario works out on the weekend. I really am. I have a feeling that Hellebuyck might play both games. But at some point, I know the games have been spread out during this month, but at some point he's going to need a rest.
Well, here's the thing. In a year where Hellebuyck has, people are talking about it in the chat room here, and I don't think he's been terrible by any means, but Connor Hellebuyck, no one is putting him in the Vezina Trophy conversation this season, right? And this is a little bit of a problem with a goaltender that has spent so much of the last 3 years stealing and single-handedly winning games for his team, that when he has a little bit of an off night, and I would say tonight was a little bit of an off night, people are kind of blown away with it. And I wonder if the Jets are a team that are prepared. Does it happen often enough to them that their goaltender lets them down, that they're prepared to jump up and win a game for their goalie who's won so many games for them? You know what I mean? Tonight is maybe that night that you're looking for them to pull that out. And clearly they made a significant push in the second and third period. But you saw the stats at the start of that game. The Nashville Predators lead the league in scoring the first goal. And they do really well once they score the first goal. They're not a team that plays well from behind. So this was one of those games, and let's give credit where it's due. We talked about in Detroit how the Jets came out after all that long rest and came out and blew the doors off Detroit right away, got up early. That gets them 2 points in that game. They come out against Washington after another long layoff. They come firing out of the gates, get 2 early goals in the first almost 2 minutes of that game. That puts them in a position to steal a point away in Washington. But tonight, there's no mistaking who was the team who came out of the gates. It was the Nashville Predators. They ran the Jets out of the rink in that first period for the most part. And, if you're the Jets, that you're suddenly playing from behind against a team that is grinding on you and has, to your point, a Vezina-level goaltender. This was one of those games where maybe there needed to be a little bit more awareness. If there's a night where you need a hot start, it's against one of the teams that scores scores first more often than maybe any other team in the league, and usually wins those games when they do it. There has to be an awareness about that. This was a game they needed to come out of the gates, and now all of a sudden they've lost 2 straight games. So the situational play for the Jets tonight was not good. Now, if we get into what they did afterwards in the second and third period, Dave Lowry talked about how much he liked it. I wanted to get into this with you and ask you this question. For you,
Sorry, just one quick one on Hellebuyck. I remember earlier on in the year, Sean, November, December, I think Hellebuyck had that stretch where he went 8 games in a row of 2 or fewer, but the Jets only won like 2 of those games, right? We talked about the time he was playing like at a Vezina level at that time, but the Jets offense went totally MIA and they didn't win enough of those games. And now on a night where Hellebuyck gives up 4, now we're everyone's saying, well, the goaltending's got to be better. Well, sure, yes, and at sometimes it can be better, but it was the Jets' inability to penetrate the other goaltender. To me, that was the biggest thing. But yes, of course, that one goal that Hellebuyck would like back, it ends up being sort of a deflator. So, sorry, back to the original point, but I just want to get that in quickly about Hellebuyck because we talked about it at the time, that the Jets were unable to take advantage of strong goaltending, and now, on a night where maybe he's average or below average, people are kind of looking around going, what's going on here? Well, the goalie's not going to be exceptional 70 nights of the year or 60, whatever the number is.
Well, I wanted to ask you this question because I think there's a way that you could look at this, and you and I have had this conversation. This was definitely a Paul Maurice thing, but everything about Paul Maurice was finding the positives and things. And every once in a while, if it was an absolute stinker, he'd come out and he'd say, that was a bad game. But for the most part, when it came to Paul Maurice, he a way to be happy about the game, about something that had happened, right? And so I can almost give you the playbook. Paul Maurice would have come out after that game and said, yeah, a bit of a tough start, but we won 2 out of 3 periods here tonight. We were the better team in the second period. We were the better team in the third period. We put up a whole lot of shots, weren't getting the bounces, all that kind of stuff. And there wasn't, that wholehearted sale of like, oh no, that was a great game, great to build on, all that kind of stuff. But Dave Lowry still sounded happy with the play in the second period and the third period. He said he thought he liked it. Sometimes I like a little bit of Sheldon Keefe's response to Toronto yesterday, where he'll just call out a dog game. And I'm not saying that this was a dog game, but I like it when a coach is not afraid to kind of say, to come out on a night like tonight and say, yeah, we won the second and the third, but we did not win the first. And he did kind of say this, but maybe what we're talking about, it's a little inexcusable to come out flat against a team that when they get up on you is hard to come back against. But roundabout way of me getting to the question, when you take a look what happened in the second and the third, how much of that do you think is the Jets just taking over that game? How much of that do you think is score effects and the Nashville Predators changing their style of game? Because I think in the third period they entirely float back to a 1-2-2 and stop pressuring the puck entirely, which again, I go on the record and I say it's the worst thing you can do against the Jets. And sure, it didn't necessarily result in a comeback, but it sure led, in my mind, to the Jets dominating the back half of that game. But if it's an even game, and if the Preds don't have a 3-point lead or a 3-goal lead, I'm not sure that game looks like that. Like I'm not convinced that the Jets took over that game as much as Nashville just started playing different and went into a shell.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. Obviously, score effects were a factor in the game. There's no doubt about that. I would say that the Jets had a strong start to the second. Some of that was partly the power play. But I thought the Nashville's back half of the second was actually a lot better, and then they got to 4-1, and then things kind of stabilized for them. But then the Jets kind of really poured it on in the third. So, I mean, for sure, I'm not up here saying the Jets played great in the game. Like, they had stretches where they played very well, but they also had stretches where they really struggled with the speed, right? I mean, someone mentioned to me, Dean Shaw, I believe, on Twitter, saying that in some parts, the first period looked like the Carolina game, where Carolina kind of skated the Jets into the ice at stretches. I would say that that's fair, but I mean, I don't think this was a game where, if you're the Jets, you're not going in there saying Nashville dominated us, we have no chance against them. Like, this wasn't one of those 7-1 games like they had against Minnesota or Colorado, to me. But at the same time, they need to be better. That's for sure. I mean, there's things that they did well, but there's things that they need to improve on. And for me, one of the biggest things was the power play. I didn't think it was good enough. But one thing we should talk about too, I know we've talked a lot about the top six and everything else, but the Jets aren't getting any secondary scoring right now, Sean, right? And early in the year, what were we talking about? We were talking about how much the defense was active, very involved. And hey, Josh Morrissey had another great game. He was very involved offensively and did a great job. And his point shot is what got the Jets back into it 25 seconds into the third, where is Mark Scheifele residing? In the blue paint where Dave Lowry wants him to be, right? I mean, right in the middle of the action. But I felt like, Sean, early in the game, the Jets weren't spending enough time around the blue paint, and that's part of the reason why they fell behind 3-0. So I think the Jets are going to have to find some. I mean, Dave Lowry was looking for solutions, right? He got the blender out today. So Christian Vesalainen gets a bump. Dave Lowry puts Paul Stastny back with Adam Lowry. Austin Pagansky got a little bit more ice time. I mean, tonight, Svechnikov only played 3 minutes and change. Now, he is coming back from an upper body injury, but I mean, to me, that's not enough ice time. But I guess this was one of the nights where he felt he wasn't really going, and it became a 3-line game very quickly because the Jets were chasing. But the other part of that, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit and I have all these thoughts. It's a great buffet special here. So, I mean,
that's what you're here for.
Last game, Sean, we talked about, well, how did Logan Stanley play so much more than Dylan Samberg? Well, tonight the tables were turned, right? Tonight it was Samberg playing 14 or 15 and Stanley only playing 10 minutes. But at the same time, I didn't say it to you, but I meant to say it to you. When I asked Dave Lowry about Tanner Jeannot before the game, I thought this was one of those nights where if I'm Logan Stanley, I'm finding Tanner Jeannot because he's going to be involved physically. So when Nate Schmidt gets hit from behind, I like that Logan Stanley went at him. I think that was absolutely absurd that was not a power play. It was clearly not an instigator on Logan Stanley, where the referees are here saying, we saved you the 10 minutes, but no, I mean that's a clear power play in that situation. But regardless, I think in that regard, Logan Stanley did a nice job, and I thought his one-on-one battles were better today. But Dylan Samberg did a nice job, and he was rewarded, right? We've talked about this a lot. And to flip back up front, so Cole Perfetti on another night where he's rolling, he gets close to 17 minutes. Last game he only played 13 and change. Tonight, up to 17. I really liked what I saw from Perfetti again. And now we're going to see what happens next. I mean, Blake Wheeler probably coming back on Saturday, but the Jets are going to have to find some combinations. And whoever said they don't like the blender, well, to me, I mean, the lines are going to be scrambled in the next little while. They don't have solid lines because of all the in and outs they've had in the lineup. So on a night where they're not being able to penetrate Saros, you got to switch up the lines. And it worked. Vesalainen was fine in that role, but the Jets need more from their third and fourth lines. And that's part of the reason why we've talked about it so much, Sean. They're too top heavy right now. And when you're not getting offense from the back end to kind of make up for the third and fourth lines not contributing, it makes it awfully, there's a lot of pressure on those top end guys. And those guys love the pressure, but they need some help when it comes to their offensive attack. And if they're not getting it from them, then the power play's got to come through. And yes, we know they got one at 5-on-3, but they need to be better on the man advantage overall in terms of their puck movement.
Agreed. I'm just going to say, T. Konopoli, this team needs more WHL toughness like Jeannot. That is one thing exactly what we said before this started. I mean, the Jets could sure use a guy like Jeannot. He seems to be maybe one of the elusive pieces. I've given my thoughts in the past on the Jets scouting and drafting and what they've been able to elicit. It seems that maybe players like that, although you could maybe throw Mason Appleton into that mold, but
Oh,
players
not
like
nearly
that
as
have
physical
been
though, right?
not even close. Not even close. No, but there's a bunch of stuff you talked about. I want to go back to the third and fourth line conversation. But let's go into Logan Stanley. I want to talk about that. I'm going to say this to your point. I think you were saying, maybe you go find Tanner Jeannot. It's time to kind of prove why you're in the lineup. And you and I have both been of the opinion, that guys, they got to play their way maybe out of the lineup before you can just bring someone in. I'm at the stage where I feel like Stanley has done that. And I'll say tonight in the game that he was playing tonight, and you're seeing a reflection, I think, of how the coach feels about his game in the minutes that he was playing. Same thing with Sandberg. But Ken, I don't know how many times you saw this. I counted twice, I think maybe 3 times. It could have been more than that before. It could have happened a couple times before I started counting and noticing it. But the Jets, especially in the second and third period, their defense were really active at moving the puck up out of their own zone. And because I thought that that Nashville was sitting back a little bit, it was a little bit easier for them to do it. So on a whole, it seemed like the Jets were able to move the puck from D to D, get it up, get it out of the zone, push it down the ice. I saw a number of times where Logan Stanley got the puck, didn't look like he knew what to do with it, and did the airmail, right? Flip it straight up in the air so that it goes up and it lands at center ice, and at least you're not turning the puck over and getting scored on. But the vast majority of times you do that, it ends up being a turnover. Now, I'll say this. I noticed, at least once, maybe twice when he did that, the Jets used that as a time to change. And maybe he was just buying time for the guys to change and get off the ice. But what I was seeing was a player that wasn't confident moving the puck out of his zone and was basically doing a long turnover. The least dangerous kind of turnover you can get, right? Because flipping it up in the air like that gives your team all kinds of time to set. You don't have to worry about trying to pass it up the middle like we've seen from him in the past, it getting turned over and it being an instantaneous chance. But I'm not seeing a confident puck moving defenseman when I see him play right now. And I think what that means is with a guy like Ville Heinola waiting in the wings, there's opportunity, especially given what Sandberg has done since he came into the lineup. There's opportunity, and Chisholm for that matter. There's opportunity to have a player like Chisholm maybe coming back, or Ville Heinola coming up, and at least giving those players an audition and seeing what they can do. You were talking about, and this has been the conversation we've been having about Dave Lowry giving opportunity to the people who earn opportunity. The flip side of that is if you're not earning that opportunity anymore, you have to be, okay with bringing in guys to try and grab that brass ring. I'm at the stage right now where I'm saying I think maybe that needs to happen, even if anything, to light a little bit of a fire under Logan Stanley and have him kind of know that there's people breathing down his neck, right? I think that's the stage that we're at. That's what I would be expecting to see going forward, potentially maybe even Saturday. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that Logan Stanley can be a very capable third pairing NHL defenseman, but I agree with you. I think right now he's not playing a confident game. I think his reads are not as crisp as they have been, and the puck movement is one of his strengths when he's playing his game. So I personally would like to see Ville Heinola get a shot at some point. If that's Saturday, by all means. I think what we're going to see that once Brendan Dillon comes back in the lineup, I think the Jets would be more comfortable going to a mobile player like what they had when Declan Chisholm jumped into the lineup and played with Nate Schmidt. I think Ville Heinola would fit in that kind of a pairing. I also told you this a couple of weeks ago. I'm at the point where I'd like to see Nate Schmidt and Brendan Dillon as a shutdown pairing. Not necessarily in Dillon's first game back coming off of COVID, but at some point I would like to see that pairing together. I think that Dylan Sandberg has complicated the matter in some regards because he is a big and strong guy, but he's also playing a confident game, a pretty smart game in terms of mobility. So I mean, we've often talked about the Jets wanting to add size, but I think that once you get Dylan back, you have that size, and you can get some a little bit more of that puck moving mobility and ability into the lineup. And obviously, we know that Ville Heinola possesses that. So I think it's a super interesting time for the Jets. They have a lot of interesting decisions to make. And Sean, I mean, you touched on it right out of the gate. What did we expect this year from the Jets? I think we thought they were moving from bubble team to contender. Can the Jets become a contender this year? Yes, but right now, the Winnipeg Jets are a bubble team. So if you're a bubble team, where are you at, and what are you considering? Are you I'm not saying turn it over to the prospects and punt on the season, but at some point, does that change the way you're viewing Cole Perfetti? Does it change the way when you want to get Ville Heinola into the lineup? Right? I mean, it's an interesting decision coming up for the Jets, and so that's the other part. I mean, I don't necessarily. I want to see Ville Heinola, but does Dylan Samberg, to your earlier point, does Dylan Samberg deserve to come out of the lineup? He's played 2 excellent games and 1 pretty steady one, even though he had 10 minutes. So to me, I think if you're bringing in Ville Heinola, you can take out Logan Stanley. But now what are you doing with Brendan Dillon? I mean, Paul Stastny needed an extra practice, but does Brendan Dillon need an extra practice? The Jets are hopeful that he's on the ice in Boston tomorrow, but they're not sure. So, and also back-to-back. I mean, are you more comfortable waiting for Dillon until Sunday, or do you want to put him in right away? I mean, it's so interesting in so many ways, and I think it's such an important time for the Jets. They're going to have a lot of decisions to make on a number of different fronts. But at what point are you making those decisions? Because by the time we get to February 1st, Sean, in that game against the Philadelphia Flyers, that's game 41, right?
Yeah.
So, and then now you're in this stretch where you play 7 and 11 in February. I mean, man, the Jets are not in a rebuild mode, but they're going to have to make some decisions when it comes to Andrew Kopp and other guys like that. I don't see Paul Stastny going anywhere, but I mean, this I find funny, and I'm not saying they're not, you're not comparing apples to apples necessarily in terms of roles and skill sets, but I mean, fans are saying, well, you have to get rid of Andrew Kopp. Well, do you think that the Nashville Predators are thinking about trading Philip Forsberg, the guy who leads their team with 19 goals, who is unsigned for next season? Do you think for 1 second they're entertaining the thought of moving Philip Forsberg for a draft pick?
Yeah, no.
Right. So, and again, so I mean, will the Jets, if the Jets fall out of it, of course they have to consider moving Kopp. But to me, I understand the asset management, but I'm not one of these people that say you can't afford to lose Andrew Kopp for nothing. Andrew Kopp has given the Jets seven good years. So to me, for a team that thinks they're in a window of contention, if you're trading for futures, I mean, you better be getting somebody who's under contract and can help your team for a couple of years, not a first-round pick that's maybe in the lineup 4 years from now or 3 or 4 years from now.
There's a point I wanted to make on here, and we're talking about this, and sometimes I think maybe you get into the mushy middle. Someone said it perfect. Freaky Fresh says here, the mushy middle where you see.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of people see them there this year. And I think the focus just becomes on making the playoffs. And so what I see around them is opportunity still. I see opportunity the way LA, San Jose, Anaheim are playing. The Edmonton Oilers absolutely lost. The Calgary Flames, I'm not convinced they've entirely turned things around yet. The Dallas Stars, who really knows whether they're legit or not when they're on? My God, are they on? And when they're off, they're just absolutely putrid. I can go up and down that list. I don't need to. But the one thing that's kind of lost in this, Ken, especially in losses against a team like Nashville tonight, because if I take a look at the standings, Nashville right now is sitting second with 53 points. But they've played 3 more games than St. Louis, who is just 2 points behind them. And Minnesota is 6 points behind them, but they've got 7 full games in hand. So it very well may be the Nashville Predators that when all the games are kind of caught up, are the odd man out on that central and end up occupying one of those wild card spots, right? That it seems like a very, very likely scenario from what we're seeing here. The one thing about this is we're talking about the Jets sneaking into the playoffs. It's starting to look the way things are going, that if they're going to sneak in, like, do we see this stage with the Jets 11 points behind St. Louis, 13 behind Nashville, 15 points behind Colorado? Those are numbers that are very difficult to overcome. So I guess what we're looking at here is, if you're the Jets and you continue on this little bit of a stretch and you stay in the mushy middle for much longer, what you're looking at is sneaking into the playoffs basically in 8th spot, where you're going to have to go through Colorado,
Vegas
in the first round, or Vegas when they get Jack Eichel in and they get everyone healthy, if they get everyone healthy. But what we're looking at here is best case scenario. If the Jets, like, let's say the Jets go and they lose the next 2 games on this stretch, they put themselves in a really tough spot where they're fighting with all these teams, but they're kind of almost kissing goodbye. And I know maybe I'm being a little dramatic with this because there's over half of a season left, but they're making it very, very, very hard on themselves to catch any of these other contenders in the Central Division, which puts them in that 8th place spot. So what you're turning your season into is basically creating the hardest possible path to the Stanley Cup if you do sneak into the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I know all these guys say this, and Paul Maurice used to say it: you sneak into the playoffs, you never know what will happen. But the Jets, setting themselves up for the hardest possible path is really, if you look back at the beginning of the season, where, Ken, I'm on record as saying I thought the Jets would be the 3rd best team in the West, behind only Vegas and Colorado. I'm not afraid or embarrassed to point out when I absolutely punt things. I've punted that so far. Doesn't look like there's a chance of them getting to being the 3rd best team in the Western Conference by the end of the season, barring like a St. Louis like 2019 push. But if we would have gone from the beginning of the season, or the last season, where Connor Hellebuck was talking about this team being a few moves away from being good for years and years to come, I think the Jets would be very disappointed, and Jets fans would be disappointed looking at a scenario where, the best case scenario is sneaking into that 8th place spot, don't you think?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, you touched on it. I mean, the Jets have posted a couple wins against really good teams, right? But at the same time, some of those points they left on the board early, a loss to Arizona here, a loss to Buffalo there. Now, suddenly, when you're talking about points percentage, those are games that are adding up. Those lost points are so valuable, even going back to, early in the year where you have the offside challenge, right? I mean, the game against Minnesota right out of the gates, right? I mean, it's so interesting because even too, you just go back to the other night against Washington, right? So in a lot of ways, it was a point earned because they scored late with the extra attacker on, but not being able to secure that second point. Now, like you said, now it's 2 losses in a row. Yes, they got a point in one of them, but now you're looking at 1 out of 4 instead of 2 out of 4, staring at a back-to-back against the Penguins and Bruins. 2 really solid teams in the Eastern Conference. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, murky middle. I mean, yes, anyone would love to get into the playoffs, but I mean, there's a lot of treading water happening right now. And hey, the Jets were 4-1-1 going into tonight. So, I mean, they're playing great teams. You're not going to win all of them. But at the same time, you got to figure out if you're in or if you're out, or if you're on the bubble, or how, how those things are going to play into your decision-making process. Because, I mean, we know what we're talking about here, Sean, when it comes to the back end. I mean, the Jets have guys that are knocking on the door. So either they're going to incorporate and integrate those guys like Ville Heinola, or you're going to have to consider trading either one of the prospects or one of the veterans. And that's the other part of it, Sean. The bigger question for the Jets, at what point, if we're talking about the core, I mean, at what point are you making a big move to the core? We know last year they made a massive change to the core when they moved Laine and Jack Roslovic for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Dubois is turning out to be an excellent addition, right? He's 17th goal tonight. He's been excellent. I mean, I'm guessing you saw, Aaron Portzline, our buddy from The Athletic, writing again yesterday that Jack Roslovic is probably on the trade block. I mean,
yeah.
Where last year Jack Roslovic was the best of the 3 players in the trade in terms of production. So, I mean, things change so quickly, but at some point here in the next little while, Kevin Cheveldayoff and his management team, they're going to have to decide where they're at and if they're okay with being in the murky middle, or if they need to make a change to the core. I mean, let's see what happens once, Blake Wheeler will be back. I mean, how long is Nikolai Ehlers going to be out? We don't really know. And for some folks that have been sounding the alarm bell, because Ehlers went on IR, like, hold on a second, he's not going on LTIR, at least not right now. So all this was a way to keep a guy like Austin Pagansky on the roster. They cleared out a roster spot. It's a retroactive move to the night the injury happened. So Ehlers could play as early as Tuesday if he's healthy enough. We don't know if he'll be healthy enough. So once Ehlers gets back, how does the top 9 look? Can they get to the point where they're playing that fourth line, getting them valuable minutes and meaningful minutes? But to me, Sean, the biggest question is what the Jets are going to decide to do on defense. I mean, we know that they brought in Brendan Dillon and Nate Schmidt. I don't see either one of them moving out. But then what does that mean for Dylan DeMello, right? What does that mean for him? He was exposed in the expansion draft, even though he was not selected. But now he's been playing steady hockey with Josh Morrissey. I mean, this is so interesting to me what they're going to do. I mean, what do you think? Do you think the Jets are going to incorporate any more of those young defensemen over the course of the year? Or, I mean, the other thing that people should remember, and just so that they're aware, I mean, even though Dylan Sandberg's playing well, the Jets are going to have to clear some cap space before Blake Wheeler comes onto the roster. And one of the guys who doesn't require waivers is Dylan Sandberg. So unless Nathan Beaulieu is going on waivers, I mean, Dylan Sandberg may find himself as the odd man out, not necessarily on the weekend, but at some point here.
I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised to see Ville Heinola in for Stanley to the point that I made in this next game. But let me be clear. I don't think that move happens, and that's what entirely turns things here. And you and I were talking about this earlier on. Cole Perfetti has looked well, and he's looked well enough that Dave Lowry left that line alone tonight, right? Like, he makes that little bit of a switch. He puts Vesalainen up to the top line, which seemed to bear fruit. They score on that first shift of the third period, and they send Lowry or Stastny down with Lowry because Dave feels that there's been some chemistry between those two players. So Perfetti's played well enough on that line that Dave Lowry didn't want to mess with that. And I think people who loved, Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois and Evgeny Svechnikov love hearing that, right? They're going good. I'm not going to mess with them, right? You want to have a coach who, if he believes that the line is going, don't mess with that, right? That was one of the big themes of our shows earlier on in the year with Paul Maurice splitting up that line. But to the point we've made before this, Cole Perfetti, he looks good. He looks great. We think he's coming along great, but it's not exactly like he's absolutely tearing things apart, right? Like that Boldy kid in Minnesota is putting up, I think he's got points in every single game he's played so far, right? Imagine, with the hype that Perfetti is getting so far after getting his first goal, imagine if he was doing that, how nuts people in Winnipeg would be going over Perfetti. I'm not saying he's not capable of that. I'm not saying I don't like that line, but what I am saying is he's not necessarily putting himself in a place where he's, shot out of a cannon and absolutely undeniable. So I want to make it clear. I think that tinkering with, the guys coming up and down from the farm, I don't think that is the answer to turn this team entirely around. I love your it's got me percolating in here. I love your kind of idea of thinking, what does this team do? What does Kevin Cheveldayoff do if, a month from now, the Jets are exactly where they are in a dogfight for this last playoff spot, and they're still getting these kind of inconsistent results? What do we do from that? And I guess I want to take the conversation in this direction of what you think that you would do, because I got to say this. Someone in the chat made the point that it's just so hard to get all these players going at the same time. I asked Paul Maurice a question like that before he left about, what he could do as a coach to kind of remove the barriers to try and get all these players going, firing all at the same time, where like the first line, you're seeing Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois do what they're capable of doing. And then you're seeing, Wheeler and Scheifele and Nick Ehlers capable of what they can do. And then Stastny and Lowry and whoever else and Andrew Kopp, like all of these guys have the capability of being phenomenal and have shown that, all of them, out throughout this year, but it rarely all comes together at the same time. And I guess I wonder, like this, now that we're talking about guys like Tanner Jeannot and players like that, I wonder if because so many players, and I've said this before, that, Nick Ehlers is a skilled player, who can turn a game on a dime, and so is Kyle Connor, and so is Mark Scheifele, and so is Blake Wheeler. Pierre-Luc Dubois, I don't hold in that. He's just a bit of a different breed. He can still score, but he doesn't score in that way. But the Jets are a talented hockey team. But I wonder if it's hard to get talent stacked on talent, stacked on talent, stacked on talent, all going at the same time. Whereas if you're switching and maybe trying to create a different kind of dynamic on a team with a player like a Tanner Jeannot, or some players like a Tanner Jeannot, that you can get everyone firing on all cylinders. And I'll point to the best example of that, the Tampa Bay Lightning. You've got skill like crazy out of the Kucherovs and players like that, and they can go and play that game. And then you've got the Stamkos line that comes out and does it in a little bit of a different way, because they've got Alex Killorn, who can play a little grittier. And then you go down one more line to, his name's eluding me. He's in Seattle now.
Yanni Gourde.
Exactly. Yanni Gourde, that line would go out and play this gritty little game and go out and so all three of those lines looked very different, and maybe it's harder to defend, or another way of saying it, easier to get all three lines going when you've got a little bit of a different mix. Whereas the Jets, it's kind of like when they're going, when Nick Ehlers is going, it looks very similar to what Mark Scheifele looks like when he's going, which looks very similar to what Kyle Connor looks like when he's going. And maybe what it is the balance, the recipe. There's a lot of sugar in this lineup. Maybe you need a little bit more oats in there if you're going to try and make a real good oatmeal raisin cookie, because oatmeal raisin cookies are the best cookies.
It is, but you need more raisins than oats. Yeah, nice call. We got another thing we agree on. Look at this. We're finding things, all kinds of new things today.
I wanted your take on it, if the Jets did go in that direction, because I do think at this stage, where else is there to go? You've changed your coach. You've shown faith in that. You said he's going to be here until the end of the year. So if you believe, and Kevin Cheveldayoff said it, he said it earlier this year, he believes this is a team capable of doing something. If you believe that this team should be challenging this season, is it not incumbent on you to make a move to try and spark this or find the right recipe?
Sure, Sean, but this is the problem. When you're a team that's spending into LTIR, you're moving out money for money. So, that goes back to what we were talking about before. So you want to, conceivably what we're talking about here is bringing in an impact player. Well, guess what? In order to bring in an impact player where you have no money to make room for an impact player, you're trading an impact player, right? So
right. That's yeah.
So, are you trading... Again,
I'm loving where you're going with this. Keep going. Don't stop. Hit that buffet. There's fresh stuff out on the buffet table. Let's take it there.
I see the lobster tails right now at the buffet table here. You're right. Do you have to change the complexion of the core group? That's the next question. But to me, I think the Jets are going to give themselves this stretch of games. And yeah, some people look at it and say, oh, well, they're not going to be able to survive the 7-11. Well, hang on a second here. That's what people said about the St. Louis Blues too, right? So they didn't make a ton of trades that year when they went on their crazy run. They made their trades in the offseason before that. So I think the Jets Kevin Cheveldayoff will need to provide a little bit more runway for this group. But if those guys don't deliver, then things are going to happen. And again, folks, I don't want you to misinterpret what I was saying. I'm not saying the Jets can't trade Andrew Kopp. If the negotiations are going south, whenever they begin, and the Jets fall out of it, well, then of course the Jets are going to have to try to recoup some assets for Andrew Kopp. But what I'm saying, it's not just an automatic that you move a player because you think you can't lose him for nothing. Andrew Kopp played 25 minutes the last game. He plays power play, penalty kill, and is currently on the first line. So those players don't exactly grow on trees. And that's also, to me, a be careful what you wish for scenario. Because, Sean, you brought up the Toronto Maple Leafs earlier. How many nights do you think Sheldon Keefe walks into his coach's office and says, you know what I wish? I wish I had Zach Hyman on this team, right? With all of the skill and talent that the Leafs have, he can't say that publicly because he knows he didn't have room for him in terms of the financing. But, those versatile players that score 20 goals and kill penalties and do all of the little things that Andrew Kopp and Zach Hyman do, those guys are hard to find. So, if someone offers a first-round pick, well, hey, you have to see what happens. But to me, the Jets they're not looking for futures. They're looking for people that can help them now and people that are under contract. So the complication with anything involving Kopp would be similar to what happened with Trouba. I mean, and Trouba had a year left on his deal. So the places you can move him are limited. I mean, the one thing that is in the Jets' favor with Kopp, if it comes to that scenario, is that he has a movable contract that a contending team could fit under their cap without having the Jets have to pay some of the salary. But, I mean, Andrew Kopp's playing on the top line for the Jets. So to me, I think the Jets are going to still make a run at trying to sign him and then see what happens. But, Sean, back to your original premise, I mean, I don't see a core player being moved in February. But could something happen before the trade deadline? That is all incumbent on how the Jets handle this next situation. I mean, we talked about it before. I mean, the one thing the Jets, this 8-game stretch before the All-Star break was going to give us a pretty vivid picture of where things were at with them. So far, they're 0-1-1 to start this stretch. And they have some really tough games coming up. I mean, we know what happens now. I mean, the Vancouver Canucks got dinged today with both JT Miller and Thatcher Demko going into protocol. I mean, will they even be available for Thursday's game? We'll see. But yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I'm fascinated by what happens. I mean, and how patient can Kevin Cheveldayoff be on that front? I think it's going to be more of a off-season retooling, if that is indeed what is going to happen. But I mean, a lot will be determined in this next little stretch of hockey. And just a quick one, I mean, folks, if you didn't see our afternoon show with Tara Sloan today, please check it out. She was absolutely fantastic, and you won't be disappointed if you invest the time. But what do you think, Sean? Do you see a blockbuster happening at some point before the deadline rolls through? Or
Well, I see it like this, Ken, to your point there. If they miss the playoffs and decide to retool in the offseason, like you're saying, and I know it's easier to do it then, right? Because it's so hard, like you said, they're right up against the cap. So it has to be a money for money thing. And you almost know you're going to lose in a situation like that, especially if you're dealing with a team that has cap space, right? Because what they're going to take to make it work for you financially is they're going to take skill. That's the dynamic that's created. That's the trades that happen now. The team that has money that it can give away or cap space that it can eat is taking talent from you to eat that cap space. So if you are going to make that kind of move like that, you already are trading from a point of disadvantage. But at this stage, Ken, given everything that's happened from like the Jets making their big run and then, saying a year later against St. Louis, yeah, we lost in the first round, but they went on to win the Stanley Cup. We were right there. Like, how many more years can you not get to where you say you think you can go without someone having to pay the price for the team not going to where everyone thinks it can go? And if you're retooling in the summer because you missed the playoffs, to me, that is bad. That is really, really bad. Like, I say this right now, and I've said this in Edmonton. Clearly, goaltending is a problem in Edmonton. And I do think that, Kenny Holland walked into that situation in Edmonton. And he was hamstrung by a bunch of contracts. I think getting guys like Zach Hyman was really good. I think he's done a lot of things while he's been there that have been putting that team in the right direction, but it's been blown up by the fact that they can't get goaltending. And I'm just on the record as saying this year, like, never mind what they're going to do with the coach. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow after that loss that they just had here. But if the Oilers go down and miss the playoffs and they didn't manage to address their goaltending for the third year in a row at this stage, if you're a GM and you can't figure out a way to get that done, then you haven't done your job. And so I would almost say the same thing at this stage. If the Jets can't seem to figure out what the problem is here that has plagued them, because the last couple of years they said they thought it was the defense, right? They needed two guys. Well, they got those guys and it's not working, and they're kind of right around the same mushy middle that they've been in for a long time now. So if you can't figure out what's wrong with this team, it's time to start asking questions of why you can't and who can figure it out, right? So I love your suggestion of like where do you go with this? Because if the Jets again a month from now are still duking it out here, you got to kind of figure out at the trade deadline, are we just saying we think this team's going to turn it around at some point, which is risky because if they don't, you miss the playoffs and you have to be the guy who thought they could do it and they didn't? Or are you going to sell? Are you going to send guys like Andrew Kopp down the road? Or are you going to go and make a bold move and try and figure this out? I think it's a fascinating conversation to be had here. Here's another reason why I think it's fascinating. And I do want to get back to before they make, okay, let me get this out of the way because then I want to get to this next thing because I know you're going to have thoughts on this. Before they do make a trade, if that's what it came down to, I have to see this because I don't think we saw this under Paul Maurice. I have to see Dave Lowry with a healthy lineup with, Stastny right. Now he's back, with Wheeler back, with Ehlers back. I have to see him take a true run at trying to balance the scoring down the lineup, the first line, the second line, the third line. And I think if you do that the proper way, someone mentioned it in our chat room here that this team would be best if Adam Lowry was your fourth line center. If you can take and, keep a guy like Perfetti in play and balance it up and down the lineup so that maybe you have a third line of Stastny in between Wheeler and Andrew Kopp, and then we've got, Wheeler, Scheifele and Ehlers, and who am I missing here?
Svechnikov would have to be there unless you're...
Maybe Svechnikov, but keeping the second line as is. I need to see that before any kind of drastic deal is made, before you try and move a significant piece out the window, because to me that is the one stone that needs to be overturned that's never been overturned, and it's so obvious to overturn. So that's what we need to see is once this team is healthy, I'm fascinated to see how Dave Lowry is going to handle this, how he's going to balance it, because if you can turn it into that team that has three lines coming off the bench that are each as equally capable of scoring as the last, and then you can maybe try and figure out a way to get Adam Lowry, and maybe you add some pieces to get like a little bit of a crunchier fourth line, create that dynamic that we've seen in the past where that line can lean on other teams and shut down other big lines. Then I want to see what that Jets team is capable of. Until that happens, I don't think you've done your due diligence to say what we need is not here in the dressing room and we need to go elsewhere.
Sure. I mean, the only thing I would counter, the thing with Lowry, the Jets committed Lowry long-term at 3.5. You're not paying your fourth-line center $3.5 million. So to me, I think you need to find more of the Renny Gord line. I think you have to have Lowry on the third line as your identity line, and then you can have Gustafsson on your fourth line, whether that's with Harkins or someone like Svechnikov, or you could play that line 8 or 10 minutes and see what happens from there, and you'd still have a little bit more offense in terms of their game. But Vesalainen, can he pick things up? But who knows, right? There's all kinds of options for the Jets. But I agree with you. I think you can't make a full assessment because, like you just said, so you're not moving Connor Hellebuck. So goaltending, could the Jets improve their backup situation? Maybe. On defense, you're not making massive moves on defense unless you're moving out veterans to make room because your organizational depth is strong on defense now, right? It's just a matter of when you integrate those guys. So then we look up front. Well, the Jets have, elite talent in their top six, but their bottom six has some nice pieces, but they haven't been rolling. So there too. And again, if you're making moves around the periphery, how much are you improving, right? The Jets already have found money with Svechnikov. He's an RFA. I would assume they're going to keep him as they should. So now you're waiting for guys like Vesalainen to find their groove, or for Harkins to get into a role where he forces his way into the top 9, right? Or you're looking for a Mason Appleton reunion, or you're looking for another forward to give you an identity line. So I think it's super interesting, and I agree with you. I think once Ehlers is back and Stastny's back, and it's gonna, Blake Wheeler will return at some point, and then we'll see where things go from there. But the Jets are certainly at a fascinating time where, in terms of what their direction is going to be. So I find it super interesting to see where things are going to go. And nice of you wanted to make me nervous. See how my tap dancing skills were.
That was accidental. But when I panicked and I was like, wait a minute, he's at the buffet. I've got like 5 minutes before this.
It's like one of those when somebody calls and you're just holding the phone over here, or sort of doing a little bit of vacuuming in the middle of the time. Oh yeah, sounds good. Talk to you later.
Sorry about that. I've got a big question for you that I want to ask, but I also want to address the calls from the audience here. We need
Okay.
the headband.
Oh yeah,
Quit
right
playing.
on.
I love
Let's
it.
go.
Let's get the headband going here, because I've seen Tristan is in here and I love him being around. I love playing his music. Let's get to the headband and make this a Sean's headband version of the Kenny and Renny postgame show. Gotta say, Kenny, I got a haircut today, but I told her you got to leave it long on the top. I need the headband needs a purpose. It needs a purpose. It needs to
got to hold her up.
Out. So I said I need some weight up here. I need some weight to give the headband a job, because it needs a job if we're going to be doing this. Here's the question I wanted to get at throughout this, because this is a thought that I've had, and I think you and I may think a little bit differently on this. And to be honest, I think you're probably right in this situation. I'm not wrong. What's new, right, Ken? But Pierre-Luc Dubois going into this offseason here has the Jets have one more year of team control after this, right? Or is it two?
Pretty sure I think it's
after
two.
this season. After this season. So here's the question that I keep asking myself.
He came 1 year later. He came 1 year later than Laine. So I believe there's two more after this. So right. Laine has one more year, because he came as a 19-year-old instead of an 18-year-old. So there is one extra year there.
Right. So, but this is what I think. If you've got Pierre-Luc Dubois and you're wanting to sign him and lock him up long term and make him, the heart of the Winnipeg Jets down the middle for years to come. If this team goes and isn't able to figure this out, isn't able to make the playoffs this year, I wonder what it starts looking like for Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's been in Columbus for a number of years, where they made the playoffs a couple times, but guys want to win, and I don't know how many guys are committed to saying I want to win in this place. Or maybe a better way to say it is, if you can choose what team you want to be on, how many guys are going to choose to say I want to start on this ride and get this team there, because there's more satisfaction in being the guy that took this team and grabbed them by the collar and got them to where they needed to go. But if you come out of this season and you miss the playoffs, is there a chance that in Pierre-Luc Dubois' head, he starts looking and saying, you know what, maybe it's not time to sign an extension with this team. Maybe I need to see that this team is capable of figuring all the stuff we're talking about here, Ken. Maybe I need to see that this organization is capable of figuring this all out before I commit long term, because maybe a couple of years from now, I'll get, teams like Anaheim are on the rise. LA's on the rise. There's a number of teams out there that are going to have money, that are looking like they're trending in the right direction, that you could just take that money and go there and try and hit a team on the rise. Is there pressure on the Jets to make something to happen this year to show a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois that there's a bright future here and that he needs to lock down now?
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, Sean. My counter to that would be when Pierre-Luc Dubois looks to his left, he's never played with a player like Kyle Connor in terms of finishing ability, and Pierre-Luc Dubois knows that if he has one of the best finishers in the league on his left, Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to put up a lot of points and be he's going to be on the ice a lot, and that means he's going to be be used in a valuable role where he's leaned on heavily. When he looks to his right now, he sees a young kid in Cole Perfetti who's 20 years old, and we already see there is an obvious bond between the two players. Both high first-round draft picks, been through a lot of the similar situations, different games for sure. And then the other part of that too, Sean, I mean, we saw the relationship with Nikolai Ehlers already, right? I mean, for a long time, I feel like Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to look around and say, what was wrong in Columbus? We played a defensive style, and I never had a finisher to the degree of Kyle Connor playing on my left. So to me, that would be very appealing for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Mm-hmm. But what I would also say, Sean, what we don't know is that how the pandemic is going to impact how players view long-term contracts. I mean, it's not just the owners. Like, our owners going to be willing to commit $8 million times 8.5 or 9 or whatever the number, 8 or 9 or whatever the number is. do players want to wait until they start coming out of the shadows here in terms of attendance? We touched on the crazy schedule. Right? We know right now the Jets are going to play 2 games next week where they have a capacity of 250 people. Like that's a big number to the bottom line in terms of losses. So I'm fascinated by how players are going to view this. Are we going to see more 4-year contracts or 5-year deals? Or are they going to say, I want the commitment? If the Jets are willing to go 8.25 for 8, if you're Pierre-Luc Dubois, are you going to say no to $64 million and change? That's a big decision to make. I don't see there being an issue in terms of Pierre-Luc Dubois thinking that this team's committed or not. The Jets are already spending to the cap and into LTIR. So if you're a player, you want to know that the ownership is committed to winning. So I think that Pierre-Luc Dubois has clearly seen that, both in terms of his acquisition, what the Jets were willing to get his services from Columbus to Winnipeg, and they've surrounded him with some of the best players he's probably ever played with. Again, with apologies to Cam Atkinson, who again is a nice hockey player and a great finisher. But he's not one of the top 10 goal scorers in the league since he's entered the league. So I don't see an issue on that front, Sean. Of course, if you haven't been able to do a lot of winning, you want to be in a situation where you think you can win. But I don't think the commitment level is an issue whatsoever. And I think that he's the kind of guy. This is how I see it. I see Pierre-Luc Dubois being a guy who didn't like how it ended in Columbus. We were there when he addressed the Columbus media. He still didn't want to get into the reasons that he left the organization. What I see from Pierre-Luc Dubois is a guy that wants to plant a flag in the ground and say, this is where I'm going to be, and I'm going to spend my prime years here getting better as a player and trying to bring this city, this province, this community a championship. Now, do I know Pierre-Luc Dubois well enough to wonder if he's dreamt of playing for the Montreal Canadiens or wants to play in a warm weather city? Of course I don't. I've had one phone conversation with him outside of a Zoom call. So I'm not going to pretend that I know what his lifelong dream is. But what I see in terms of how he acts and his accountability level and all those things, I think he's enjoying himself where he is, and I think he would like to be the kind of player that the Jets build around.
Well, I'll say this, and this is one of the things where I do think that, if his agent is driving the bus, Pierre-Luc Dubois is in a really good situation. So the team has, after this season, 1 more year of team control over him. He's an RFA with arbitration rights in the offseason. So if Pierre-Luc Dubois decides, to your point, if he gets a contract put in front of him and it's a big fat contract and he thinks maybe it's time for me to start making money, I'm going to sign this. I'm going to lock it down. If that means something to him, beyond that, if building a team, being in a city where his dad is, if he's seen enough, if he likes the fact that Kyle Connor's going to be around for a number of years and he likes the fact that he's going to be playing with that player, I agree with you. There's a ton of reasons for him to want to stay. Never mind, I'm proud of my city. This is a good place to play. It's got good hockey fans. So there's plenty of reasons. But if we want to devil's advocate this, which I love doing, if we go in the other direction, he makes $5 million a year. He's got arbitration rights this offseason. So if he arbitrates a 1-year deal, he's going to get paid. He's going to, maybe the Jets, we've talked about this. Can you lock him down for 8.5? Well, if he goes to an arbitrator, what's he going to get anyways, Ken? Is it going to be 7? Is it going to be in that neighborhood? So in the end, it's not, yeah. So if he keeps doing what he's doing, it sounds like by not signing the Jets long-term deal, he's missing out on a ton of money, but he's not, because all he's missing out on is what he would make in this next upcoming year. And if the Jets were going to offer him $9 million and he gets arbitrated $7, well, then it's $2 million that he's missing out on. That he may be able to.
2024 is his UFA year, so it's 2 more after this year.
Well, I'm looking at Cap Friendly, and it's
but he's not. He didn't start at 18. He started at 19. So his
never mind.
7 years will expire after the summer of 2024. I know you're thinking.
This is one of those BX of 2015 Anaheim Ducks moments.
Well, no, the premise is right? If you're 18 years old, 7 years would take you to 25, but
right,
he only started at 19.
regardless, he can say it's not like he's going to be poor next year. He's not in Andrew Kopp territory, right? Where it's like
No,
every
sure.
single year he's not signing a long-term deal. He's not making that much. He's already making $5 million. He's going to make more with arbitration rights. I wonder if you've got your agent playing hardball and you're looking at this and you're thinking, one, so I see this playing out. Well, I see it playing out maybe this way. If the Jets are going to keep him, and you talked about it, you wrote an article saying that he'd sign the richest. You said 3 bold predictions. One is that the Jets are going to sign him to the largest contract in Winnipeg Jets history. I wonder just how large it has to be
Sure.
for him to forgo looking at the rest of the market. And I know I know you brought this up, and I know people are talking about, in the COVID era, there's not as much money out there, and maybe players are going to have to take shorter term deals. The one thing that I've found time and time again is every time we think a flat salary cap or financial problems are going to keep teams from spending, it doesn't. Someone out there is going to take a look at Pierre-Luc Dubois, and if he gets to unrestricted free agency, he is going to get the money that he wants to get. It's going to happen. So he knows he can get paid. So to me, it's almost like if you're the Winnipeg Jets and you want him to sign long term, you're going to have to go above and beyond what market value would be to keep him around. Now, maybe he's the kind of player who looks at that and says, sure, I could be that guy who steals a whole bunch of money. Now I put my teams back against the wall financially. It makes it hard for me to win here because I haven't left my team enough money to go and get other teammates. All these things come into play, but I just do wonder if the Jets end up outside of the playoffs this season. Pierre-Luc Dubois goes in a year where I'm sure the Jets would love to lock him down long-term, if it makes it harder for them to lock him down long-term. That's just the thought that keeps popping up into my head.
Sure, it's totally fair, Sean. I mean, the big thing for the Jets, that summer of 2024 is when Wheeler, Scheifele, and Hellebuck all expire. So a lot of money is coming off the books, where in those years, it's a much easier to pay Pierre-Luc Dubois if those salaries are not on the books. But you have to be able to get to that point.
Right.
So but in some ways, so to your point, the Jets going 1 year at $7 million before arbitration or whatever the number is, it might help them in the short term, but then you put yourself in a very precarious position unless you have kind of a handshake deal that you're going to go longer, right? I mean, and I don't think that they would be comfortable doing that. I mean, they may not have a choice, but I don't know. Like I said, that sort of enhances the importance of getting the deal done going into this summer.
Exactly. And the other argument I would make is, there will be lots of money for the Jets to pay Pierre-Luc Dubois once Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, and Connor Hellebuck, if they were to left. But what does that do to your belief in the team, especially? And I mean, I know a lot of people will think by that point, Blake Wheeler, it'll be good to get him off the books at that stage, definitely at that price tag. Who knows about Mark Scheifele at that stage where he's at in his game? But if you're losing Connor Hellebuck at that point, you are losing basically the foundation that this house has been built on for a long time. And who knows what the Winnipeg Jets would look like even at that time without that goaltender backstopping you. I mean, that's the, of all the players that the Jets could potentially lose down in the next couple of years, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Mark Scheifele in a couple of years, Andrew Kopp in the offseason. Nothing scares me more if I was a Winnipeg Jets fan than what the Winnipeg Jets would look like without Connor Hellebuck. That's the scary one. So to me, that business with Pierre-Luc Dubois has to be tidied up and taken care of before, because it's probably that's one of the sales pitches you're going to be making to keep Connor Hellebuck in the fold, is that right. We've got Pierre-Luc Dubois down the stretch. He's now the sales pitch going forward. So the timing of this is all very interesting. I think this summer is going to be interesting. I just think if the Jets had gone and done what I thought they were going to do this year and finished, third in the conference and made some noise in the playoffs, if you're Pierre-Luc Dubois, you've taken a look around all your points. I've got a great winger. I'm playing with this as a team that looks on the rise. We could do something at any point, and you're going to pay me 8.5 times 8 years. Darn right, show me where to sign, right? But if you're coming into this and you're thinking, we got out of the Canadian division, we got a surprise win against the Edmonton Oilers, so I think we can all see how very, very foundational problems that the Jets exploited last year, and swept them 4 straight, but it was a very close series, and then got kind of carpet bombed by the Montreal Canadiens, and then you go and miss the playoffs this year, there's going to be some questions in my mind about the legitimacy of this team winning, even with me there.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. I mean, there's a lot of questions to be answered in the next little while, and that's the beauty of sports, right? I mean, it's all about defining your legacy, right? I mean, if you're the Jets, you're trying to win. You don't want to be a bubble team. You don't want to be a team that misses the playoffs and says, "What if?" I mean, that's just the facts. I mean, that's where we're at. So, to me, I think that sometimes that brings out the best in players. So I think we're going to see what the Jets. I mean, Josh Morrissey mentioned the word identity today again. The Jets are going to have to determine what kind of team that they are over this next stretch of hockey, and it's ultimately going to determine where they're going to be at and what their mentality is going to be going into the trade deadline and beyond.
All right. Last question here. Do you see, because I've seen it pop up a couple times, do you see Dubois taking a bridge deal?
I don't know. Mean, I don't know. What depends what
a bridge deal would be a 2-year deal or maybe a 3-year deal that would take him 1 year past.
No, I mean the Jets want to sign him long term. I mean, I don't
think the Jets would offer a bridge deal.
They want to sign him long term, and I think they're going to do everything in their power to get him. They see him as a foundational piece, so yeah. I see him as being a guy they want to build around.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for us here tonight. Thank you so much. We took it in some different directions here, but it seemed like the chat room was engaged and enjoying it. So we appreciate your time as usual. Going to give one last pitch to our earlier show today. Our long form show with Tara Sloan. We love those shows, and it was another one that we absolutely loved. She was phenomenal. Seemed to appreciate her time here, tweeted it out, enjoyed her time, enjoyed the chat room as we do, and of course they're going to enjoy the chat room because you guys are great. You make the show come alive. Thank you so much for that. We will see you. Our next show will be Saturday against the Bruins. It's going to be early afternoon kind of thing, so maybe get the steak on the barbecue and sit down and get ready for some more Kenny and Renny, because I'm sure it's going to be a good one, win or lose. If they win over the Bruins, that's going to be a big win. If they lose, we're going to be starting to talk maybe some more problems. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. You have yourselves a great evening.